All right, welcome to another edition of the Home Studio Craft Podcast. I am Scott.
I am Tippins.
Tippins.
How's it going?
Good. Good, buddy. Good, man.
What are we talking about today?
We are going to talk about the 11 ways to create more depth in your mix. So, so let's get started.
All right. So where would you start? Like, everyone talks about wanting to have a wide mix. They want everything to sound massive. How do you accomplish that?
Mean, it's there's obviously 11 different ways. It may be more, but we're just going to touch on 11 different ways to create some depth in your mix. So start off with panning, right? Panning may seem like an obvious thing, but it's critical. It's foundational, right? So, let me ask you, right? When you're mixing, how do you think about panning, like the placement of instruments within the stereo image? How do you think about it?
So my YouTube educated, which is not a lot of education, but so what I've been doing, at least, I see a lot of people go back and forth on drum panning, which will be interesting to get your take on, because
Sure.
Some people say, it's pointless to do things like not all the way left or all the way right in the middle, setting it to 25 in Ableton rather than
Sure.
50 on drums. So
Right.
A lot of people argue about that online.
What are they saying?
Some people's will essentially put certain symbols left and right, obviously, which is kind of, I kind of do that. A lot of the programs I use automatically do that.
Sure.
So I do that, but some people do say they just put it down the middle, like drums.
All the drums right down the middle.
Yeah, I've seen that. And I think it could be more EDM people or something. Or maybe not rock genres per se, but I have seen that. And then bass down the middle, right? Mm-hmm. Basically always.
Yeah.
Guitars, I do left, right, and then a lot of times a center track as far as rhythm. But sometimes I've just done left and right. So
when you're saying left and right, are you just a little bit off center, or you're almost where it's that
like hard
perfect
panning?
Yeah. All the way right, all the way left?
That's what
Interesting.
that's what I've been doing for guitar. And then down the middle too, if I feel it's not clouding things up, or I want to thicken it up. But I don't know if that's right, but it sometimes.
I don't think there is any right?
Yeah.
Any right or wrong. I think that, depending on the genre that you're working in. So in a pop context, down the middle, maybe it's could interfere with the vocal a little, but you can just, just take that off. It doesn't have to be much off, So, for me personally, when I think about panning, I'm thinking about, I kind of try to put myself in as if I was on stage or in the audience watching a band perform with whatever instrumentation that I've got going on.
I think the argument people say, the drum people who are talking about putting it down in the middle make kind of is if you're in the audience, that would essentially be right there, right? It would be down the middle. But I still keep the cymbals,
right? But you still have the the mixer, right? Mixing the live sound, and and you've got your mics on your toms, kick, snare,
exactly,
right? Your overheads.
Yeah.
So, and however that person, if you're right there, at that stage, it's going to sound like that because you're probably hearing more off the monitors than you are from the speakers. But yeah. Well, one thing it's kind of that when I started, I always take and I put my snare a little off, if I'm looking at my DAW, a little off to the left, and the hi-hat with that too. And it's kind of the opposite of where most people do it. Most people are on the right, you know what I mean? So they put the snare and the hi-hat, because that's the way a drummer would be if they were on stage.
Yeah.
Right? So it's
So why do you
So it's
do
kind of
that?
like,
Just
you know what? That's a good question. I don't know why it started, but I mean, it doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah.
When you're listening to it.
I mean, those nuances, little nuances of things being different add up.
Yeah, so I don't know why but I just always do that. And then like guitars, depending on the effect you want, just putting them out like that wide stereo sound on the left and right. The acoustic I'll typically have up towards the vocalist a little bit more. But that changes, with every mix, that might be changed in various degrees. But I've never done it where it's kind of like that panned like hard right or hard left. I've never tried that. Maybe with like a guitar line or something like that. But I think that's cool. I have to
So
check that
lead
out.
guitar, you do down the middle basically all the time. Right?
If there's no vocal going on,
yeah,
I would do it down the middle. Sometimes unless there's like some kind of like another instrument playing in conjunction with it, like a synth or something like that, in which case I'd have them, left and right a little bit. But if there's just, no vocal going on, it's just a solo, right down the middle. But otherwise I try to, like, if it's like riffs or just fills or something like that, I can be like left or right with either one of that.
And you're not concerned when you're doing that about, making it equal left and right at all, right? Or you're just
like
doing
a balance, like having that, like something to compensate for, like guitar. If you got a guitar riff going on the right side, and there's nothing. No, I'm always aware of that. But it also depends on the song too. So if if it really feels like it's, like lopsided, right? It's like there's too much going on the right. Yeah, I'll do that. So it's just kind of just going with your gut, just an intuitive feeling.
Because
that's a good
do
point.
struggle with it. Like if it's a chorus and I want a riff, like answering the vocal or something like that. Like sometimes I do struggle with mixing those and getting them to sound right if they're down the middle. So
right.
Throwing it off, that makes sense. And that sidechain compression, if you haven't seen that video, that's helped a little bit with that, I feel like. But
or as far as like playing a riff or something like that on your guitar and having it sidechain to the vocal. So it ducks. Sidechain compression. Okay, so the next number 2 is going to be reverb. So, we've talked about reverb before, obviously, and we've talked about my new favorite reverb plugin, the Valhalla. Love that thing. It's beautiful. But, as far as creating depth in a mix with reverb, obviously you've got like the different rooms, right? So like halls or, cathedrals, things like that. They're going to, give you that like far away sound, right? And then in conjunction, playing not only with like the room sounds you're getting. So like if you want to, have that feeling of, like a live band, right? So you might have like the same reverb setting on all the instruments, so it sounds like a live band, playing in one room. But if you're doing like your typical like pop music rock mix, you're gonna pick different reverbs based on the effect that you're trying to give within the context of the mix. So maybe you're gonna have like a shorter reverb, like a room reverb on a piano, for example, and you want that to sound up a little bit closer. And then maybe you want to have like your guitars, with like a hall reverb with a long pre-delay, so it sounds, further away. So if you play with that pre-delay, that's going to give you, the option to make it sound closer, right? Because the pre-delay is basically replicating like the response of the reverb. So if you're in a room like this and you clap your hands, that would be a really short pre-delay. But if you're in a church or a big cathedral and you clap your hands, you get that like that longer delay. So that's what the pre-delay is doing.
Yeah, okay. I'm smiling because like I've never really known what pre-delay actually does when I'm looking at these reverbs, and I just gotta mess with it. But it's good to know that it's almost like the attack, like it's almost like an attack of
Yeah,
of the
yeah. It's
reverb.
kind of like like I don't know if it's about the attack, but the response,
Okay.
right? It kind of delays that response, so it gives that effect of, so it helps you to kind of like make the sound closer, like that space smaller or the space larger, like by adjusting the room in conjunction with the type of reverb that you choose, like a hall or something like that, or plates.
And as
you know.
far as like trimming off like low and high end,
Yeah, so that brings us to well, actually we can jump ahead. Well, let's dive into delay.
okay.
Right? Okay, so delay, is similar to reverb in how you can add depth to your mix too, right? So for like a reverb, you're going to use a smaller room size and a shorter pre-delay to make the sound closer. And same thing with like a delay, right? So you use like a slap back delay to like thicken up a vocal, right? Or even on guitar, picking or something like that, just to thicken that up a little bit. Or you can use I'll just use vocals as an example. Or you can use like a long delay with a short amount of feedback to kind of thicken up and give some depth to a vocal, right? Where it's not as kind of a wash like a reverb would be. So it adds another effect. And the combination of like delays and reverbs together on vocal sounds
And
pretty
explain
amazing.
feedback. So that's on every delay pedal, every delay plugin. We know what feedback is, but in the context of that and how it affects the
It's just
sound.
the amount of times that delays is going to continue to repeat,
Okay.
right? Like a digital delay, where an analog delay it just keeps, where you're looking like at the bucket brigade, and it just every time it goes into that new, circuit, it builds up a little more noise. That's what you hear with like an analog delay. You get that, if you have a lot of repeats going on. You get that noise build up, which is really cool quality.
Yeah.
But so that's all it is. So you can kind of control the delay effect to be cleaner, right? With less feedback, less
Okay.
repeats. So one thing that I should mention too is, and it's not a requirement, but definitely check out like a delay reverb calculator. There's some good calculators online to kind of determine, the settings on your reverb, the settings on your pre-delay, or the settings on your delay and so forth. If you're not using like quarter note or eighth note
So how does
selections.
a delay calculator, like what would you put in, like?
Well,
would
I
that
pretty
work?
much use them on reverbs, because most of the time on delays I'm working with just like the subdivision of the beat. So it's either like a 16th or a dotted eighth or an eighth or a quarter or a half.
Mm-hmm.
So it's pretty much I'm using a time calculator for the reverbs to determine like the pre-delay and the reverb settings as far as like how long the reverb tail is going to be. And in doing that to kind of keep it tight, you know what I mean? Like if it's going to basically, fall off at the end of that measure or two measures, whatever that is. And, once again, it's not a requirement, but if I'm trying to get something really clean, I'll do that.
And does it go based off the tempo of the
Yeah.
song? Okay.
Yeah, it works off the tempo, and then you can just figure out like how many. Like, so for example, if you want to set it at a certain setting, then that's for 1 bar, and if you want that reverb to go over 2 bars, you just double that, or cut it in half for half a bar.
Yeah.
But it's
That's
definitely
cool.
something to explore for sure. If you haven't done it before, I would definitely recommend it.
Yeah. I could see how that would
Yeah.
clean things up, because I have issues with my reverbs feeling
Yeah.
messy. And
Yeah, I mean that can definitely that's definitely something you got to watch with reverb, right? You don't want to go like too crazy with it, because it can make things sound really muddy and just have a lack of focus.
yeah.
Okay, so that covers delay. So let's talk about EQ. So EQ it's kind of like the foundation of anyone's mix, right? So there's a couple of things to take into consideration when you're EQing a mix. Obviously, you want to have each instrument occupy its own little sonic space within the context of the mix. And then there's other certain things that you should take into consideration as far as like filtering goes, right? So if, say, for example, you want something to sound further away, like you've got a synth pad, for example, right? And it happens to be really bright, like just your stock pad, whatever instrument you're using. You can actually take a low pass filter, right, a high cut, and put that on there, or maybe you even just use a little shelf where you kind of trim the high end down, so going whatever, let's just say like, 1K up, and then just trim it down, or wherever that's the frequencies are predominant for that particular synth patch. And that will help to kind of like place that synth, backwards in the mix a little bit, right? And then the other thing too you can do conversely is take a low end filter, right? So you're going to have a high pass, low cut, and then just to carve out some space from the other instruments like guitars, keyboards, and so forth, that leaves some room for like the bass and the drums, like kick drum, low tom, floor tom, something like that.
And so that'll sound further away.
Well, it's not gonna. No, the really trimming off the high end's gonna make things sound further away because
the high end's first.
Yeah, because those sounds are going to dissipate first. Like that's like if you listen to anything in nature, something that sounds far away you're not going to hear those high frequencies because they dissipate quicker, right? But by trimming out the low end off of other instruments, you're going to create some space, for the kick and for the bass, right? Which will kind of make those things stand out a little more. They're going to be up front a little bit more. And, you want those like the kick and snare and stuff to kind of come up. Moving on, we can talk about number 5, volume automation. Now this kind of is, it's common sense, right? So if you've got something that's your faders are pushed up and they're loud, it's going to sound closer. And you can also make things sound further away by just bringing down the volume. So it's and then you can play with that through automation throughout the course of the mix. So you want to push some things up, you can make them louder, right? They're going to appear closer, or just bring it back down a little bit to make them sound further away.
And you'll do that for like different parts of the song, like the chorus or like a solo or something.
Yeah, or whatever it demands.
Yeah,
I guess.
Whenever you want something.
Yeah, you want to. Yeah, you want to kind of make the mix. I don't know, not feel like so static, right? So you can just kind of play around with the levels, and a lot of times it'll be with vocals, or some other predominant part, in a verse or a chorus, something like that.
Okay.
All right. So next up we have parallel processing, and we talk about parallel processing. We're pretty much talking about vocals and reverb, right? So like you've heard of parallel compression.
Yeah.
Right? So you basically make a copy of like typically the vocal track, and then what you're going to do is like heavily compress that copied track, right? So it's going to kind of sit underneath the main vocal, and you don't have to overly compress the main vocal, right? Because if you overly compress something, it's going to make it sound flat. So it's not going to have as much dynamic range, right? And that dynamic range is going to make that instrument sound closer, right? So it's going to make it pop out more. And so the cool thing about parallel processing is you're able to thicken that part, right? Let's just use vocals for in this discussion, and still retain the dynamics of the original vocal tracks. So that's a kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, that's like the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool.
And you can also do like parallel processing with reverb. So what you can do is you can take to kind of like widen out the sound of let's just stick with the voice, right? So, or guitar or whatever. You can take and you have a couple sends, let's say on a guitar part, right? So you send it to one reverb, one send to one reverb, and that reverb is panned all the way to the right. Okay? And then take another send to the return track to another reverb with a totally different setting, and that one's panned all the way to the left. So you've got two return tracks containing reverb, one panned to the right and the other one panned to the left. And it doesn't have to be like hard right or hard left, but as much as is effective, right? So it's definitely going to be panned right and panned left. And there's two different settings, and so now you've taken that guitar part and you've really created something interesting, right? So you've got this one cool reverb sound coming out of the right channel, and another cool, maybe like a hall reverb in the right channel, and maybe like a small room reverb in the left channel. So now you've got this really spatially interesting sound. So it helps to widen out that mix and create some more depth with that mix.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
That's cool.
That's a cool thing to do.
Yeah, that's not something I've really done much of. That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
It would,
and it's not something you're always going to use, but it's one more thing you can do to, create an interesting mix.
And you use that mainly on vocals, or
you can use it on anything.
Okay.
Yeah, anything you want.
Cool.
I've never tried it on drums,
Yeah.
but guitars I've done it. Keyboards, vocals I have not. So I have to say I've done it on keyboards and guitars.
Okay.
But maybe backing vocals. I don't know if I'd do it on a lead vocal, but I don't know. I would just say try it. If you haven't done it, try it. That's when you find out what some really cool stuff.
Yeah.
So
No, I could see that making things feel huge.
yeah.
That's
So
cool.
it's definitely interesting. All right. So next we're going to talk about layering. Right. I think we talked about this a little bit the other week, but so layering. So like with keyboards, for example, right? So you've got like a little keyboard riff like that's playing through the verse of a song. Instead of using just one sound, you can use that same riff and just bring in a different sound with a synth, or guitars, right? So like you have acoustic guitar and electric guitar play the same part, right? And maybe pan them left and right, or maybe make them right on top of each other, right? So they double it. So it's just one more thing that adds depth to the mix and interest. Layering with vocals, coming into a chorus, doubling the vocal, maybe panning it, left and right, or right down the middle. So it just creates some more depth. And what's kind of cool about layering the vocals is that if you're just not copying the track, you're actually recording the lead vocal track a couple of times, and you have those differences in timing, and can add a really cool characteristic to it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we do that a lot with just using a lot of different vocal takes and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sounds big.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds really big, especially when you're like, sending it like left and right and just opening it up a little bit. So
Yeah.
Number 8, modulation effects. So that's, chorus, phaser, flanger. Anytime you throw like a chorus on something, that's definitely going to give it like a nice like stereo spread, right? Because you're dealing with the like phase issues on there from the chorus. Same thing with the phasers. Flangers can almost give like that, like phasers and flangers can kind of give it like almost like a 3D sound.
Yeah.
But those are, I would say the chorus is probably more widely used. Flangers, that's a particular sound. I don't know. Have you ever worked with like flangers?
Yeah,
in a
I've
mix?
messed with all three of them.
Yeah.
The only one I currently have is, at least in like physical pedals for guitar, is a chorus pedal.
Yeah.
And I use probably chorus the most, but I love the sound of a phaser. Eddie Van Halen loved a phaser.
Yeah. All right, so up next we have compression. So we talked a little bit about side chaining, right? So you can get some depth to your mix with like doing the side chain where the one instrument ducks behind another depending on who it's sidechained to. Like that guitar riff you were talking about, you had it sidechained to the lead vocals. So when the vocal comes in, that little guitar riff ducks behind the vocal. So that's creating some depth. And the other thing too is with compression, you want to be careful not to overly compress everything in the mix, because that's going to make the mix sound really flat, right? So you want to have, some more dynamics with the vocals, probably on drums, right? Depending on the type of mix you're going for, because if you have less compression on the drums, for example, they're gonna pop out, right? They're gonna be more dynamic, rather than like a heavily compressed drum like in EDM. It's like it's all compressed. There's no dynamic range. It's just that. So I would just say just be careful about how much compression you're using, just so you don't make everything like super flat. So play around with that.
Yeah, and guitars don't need a lot of compression and it depends the sound you're going for.
Yeah, I would say it depends on the sound you're going for.
But
right.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so next up, number 10, ambient samples. Now, this is kind of unusual. I'm trying to think of... did you ever listen to Leslie Feist, her first album? She had some really cool stuff where she was doing on there. So she kind of used some like found sounds, like some recorded sounds that she would, like just sounds of like her walking upstairs, something like that. And that, she kind of incorporated that into songs, or like sounds of like, people talking, in the background, something like that. So that's a little on the more experimental side, but that's some pretty interesting stuff you could do there.
Yeah, on the first song on how we have it structured now, the first song has that Can't See the Bride song, we're like talking at the beginning of it. Yeah, that's cool. Like nature sounds or
nature
something.
sounds.
MGMT, they do a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah, those guys are cool.
Yeah,
I like them a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot of those like guys that are maybe one instrumentalist, like a bass player or a guitar player, and then guys with a laptop. The other guy has a laptop, and that's it.
Right.
But yeah, they're pretty cool.
Yeah,
they use a lot of those. So.
Yeah. So that's that's one. And then number 11, stereo wideners. So you're probably familiar with this. You have the Slate subscription, right? So you've got the SSL wideners in there, and then also within Ableton itself, the utility plugin allows you to widen the stereo field with that as well. So that helps you to create more depth within your mix. Just be careful using those. I would just say be careful using the wideners too much, because you can definitely create some phase issues with your songs. But that's one more tool. So I would say overall, if creating depth in your mix is just using a combination of all these different techniques. And it's really the contrast between the different techniques that are going to, give you that depth, right? So you've got like a short delay on a guitar, and you've got some nice, hall reverb on that piano. So it's just mixing and matching, and using your ears and deciding what, because you have an idea of what your mix is, what you want it to sound like, right? And what we want it to sound like isn't necessarily how it always comes out, but that's kind of the cool thing about the process of mixing is it's kind of like taking you in its own direction, what it wants to be.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, so those are the 11 techniques that you can use to create more depth in your mix. And thanks for listening, and be sure to like our YouTube channel.
YouTube,
right?
Instagram, Spotify. Follow us on Apple Podcasts. Everywhere you get your content, we are.
And review us too if you like what you're hearing. Hopefully you do.
For sure. Yeah, I don't think there's many other music production focused podcasts like this that are, really education based,
Yeah.
right? So, yeah, if you're learning like I am, I learn
Like
new
me,
stuff
I'm
every
learning.
episode. Yeah.
There's a thing the Buddhists have. It's called beginner's mind, right? So if you approach everything as a beginner, you're always keeping yourself open, and you're always learning and always progressing. So anyway, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching, and we'll catch you in a couple of weeks. Thanks.
Peace.
Peace.